over 3 million of our completed forms, a short form compared to diagnostic. And believe it or not, we actually have more omits in a short form. Now, that wasn't statistically significant, but it surprised us. We have a lot of schools that add extra questions and that they don't have a concern about the length of the survey. So while I'm not saying that it's never an issue, I think it can be, especially if they're completing a lot of surveys. I think that increasing the value of the survey is what's going to help, and if they expect it every time. We do know about research that shows that if it's episodic, they are not as likely to take it and complete it as if it's every semester, every course. So that's another thing to consider.
Well, that was my question.
Okay.
So most of your schools do every course every semester?
A lot, especially here in Texas, they're required to, and in different places, they do every semester, every course. Students expect it, and they do it. So. Okay, so that was survey fatigue. One other question came up is talking about the idea instrument to your students. Doesn't that sort of taint the process? That's a good question. We get that often. We feel like helping students understand what the targeted learnings are is just good sound pedagogy. Articulating the target in different ways, showing them here's the ideal language, here's the course objectives, how they relate, is another way of helping students understand what's the target they're trying to hit. And so we suggest that you do put your idea objectives right in the syllabus and show them how they relate to your course objectives. So don't worry about that. We don't suggest, I've heard Steve Benton, our senior research officer, often say, not on the day of the survey. You know, when you ask them to complete the survey, you don't say then, remember, it's objectives 3, 4, and 5. That would be tainting. But at the very beginning, putting it in the objective, in the syllabus, talking about it at midterm, how are we doing, because this is the target of the course. That's just good sound pedagogy with my education colleagues agree. Okay. So don't worry about that. It's good practice. And then the question came up about gaming the system. Can't we just game the system? Can't we just figure out what are students going to rate high and just select those so we can get higher scores, so we can get better results? Well, I'll tell you what my colleague Steve says. Steve Benton, he used IDEA for 25 years as a faculty member at Kansas State University, 10 of those years he was a partnership. He says, he confesses, he tried every way he could think of to game the system. And the only way to really get good scores is to focus on student learning and help your students. With that aside, I think it's possible for faculty to do that, to look on the back and figure out what are they rating high. Next time I'm just going to select that. But it lacks integrity. And it jeopardizes the validity of the instrument. And so really it's an issue of value and integrity, not the validity of the instrument. So the use of the instrument is just as important as the studies behind the system. So those are 3 things I wanted to mention before we get started, and we can answer other questions as we go. For this session, we're going to talk about how to help individual faculty members. So we're going to put our faculty developer hats on now. We had on our faculty evaluation hat earlier, and then our program assessor hat, and now we're going to put on our faculty development hat. We'll talk about the strategic use of IDEA for planning faculty development. Where are you going to put your money? You have X amount of money. Where's the most strategic place to put it to get the best bang for your buck, to get the strategic dividends from your investment based on data? And then thirdly, I'm going to tell you a little story, a short story, about the school that's done a phenomenal job of using IDEA to plan, to model, and evaluate a faculty development program. So, we're going to start with Cole's reflective learning cycle. How many of you are familiar with Cole? Okay, Cole's education people in English. 1984, he wrote a seminal work called Experiential Learning. If you haven't read it, I recommend it to you. Based on Dewey and Lewin and many others, Freire, popular theorists who talked about how important it is to experience things and reflect upon the experience. And Cole's main point here is you need to complete the cycle to get the main benefit of learning from experience. You can't just experience it and then automatically learn. You have to reflect on that experience. You have to conceptualize something new about that experience and then try something new. And that's when you will actually close the loop. You will actually develop and grow and learn more by using this cycle. And so I like to use that framework, if you will, to think about your faculty. Okay, you want them, they are now becoming your students. The faculty are students now because they are learning about teaching and learning about learning. And so they teach their course, that's their experience. And now they're going to collect data and reflect on those data. You're going to get their reports, you're going to help them reflect on their reports. Then they're going to think about those research-based methods for better student learning. What are the reports suggesting that I try? And then try new techniques, new methods, new things in the classroom, and then they start the process. And I would suggest to you that as a faculty developer, this really is the role that you have for your faculty. So you're going to help them, first of all, with what is your role? You're going to help them with the faculty information form. And we already know here today that this is a big issue for you here at Jacksonville State. It's an important one. So your job, or your mission, should you decide to accept it, as you go out from here to your faculty, is to not just reach the top of the tree, the knowledge and skills. Here's the FIF, here's how you do it. But also reach down into the emotions. What do you care about this? And do you feel like it's just another thing you have to do? Well, let me show you how it helps you customize your report to exactly what you are targeting in your class. Help them with their beliefs about the faculty information form, their value to the faculty information form, and their assumptions about that faculty information form. So that's really the challenge there. It's more than just here it is, here's how you do it. It's helping them value it and understand that it's a critical component to the philosophy of IDEA, which places student learning at the center of measuring teaching effectiveness. Then you have to help them interpret their reports. So that's the next step that you'll have as faculty developer. Not only are you interpreting your own reports, but now you're going to help them interpret their reports. You're going to help them identify the suggested action steps. They're going to look at page 3 and they're going to say, I don't know what to do with this. So you're going to help them identify where it says consider increasing use. Some of them are going to say, wow, I've got 10 things I'm supposed to do. What do we do? Well, you help them narrow it down, and I'm going to show you how to decide on which 2 or 3 to work on. Okay? And then you connect them to resources. You'll take them to the website, or you'll print it off and hand it to them, whatever works for you. Send them the link in an email, whatever's going to work. Show them that the resources are of no cost to them, that they can get these resources to find ways to help them. And then help them with implementation. And there's where you might need a workshop. You might need a forum with faculty who've done it before and let them tell their stories. And we'll talk about that. So first of all, remember, if you use the short form, you're only going to get summative data. So keep the short form for your special types of classes that we mentioned earlier, your student teaching, nursing, clinicals, private music lessons, business practica, etc. So because you get more data and you get suggested action steps with your diagnostic form, and they're keyed to reports and papers that will help them actually improve. So from a faculty development perspective, you really want them using the diagnostic. Remember this study, you want to keep that handy because you'll might want to make copies of that and give it to your faculty, help them to use it proactively, as well as to understand why they're being given certain suggested action steps. So you're working with individual faculty, you want to help them with the faculty information form, help them learn how to select the objectives. So how do you do that? Well, remember, we've got the video on the home page. So that's one thing. If your faculty wants short video clips on the how-to, that will do that. It does touch on the philosophy. It does touch on valuing it because it shows how it customizes their report. You've got your directions to faculty handout that you can give to them. We also have on our blog some very short, consumable, bite-sized amounts of information about the faculty information form. There's 3 parts: faculty information form part 1, part 2, part 3. You can send them the URL link in an email. They can click on it and read it. It's pretty quick. bite-sized amounts of information. And that's another reason why I recommend that you subscribe to the blog, because those blog posts can be very useful for you as you work with your faculty. So you might also want to have faculty meetings. You might want to sit in with some of the faculty meetings as they talk about objectives that they're selecting. So as they're deciding on objectives for a course, you're going to keep them on track. You're going to remind them of those 3 questions. You're going to be the one saying, well, is it a significant part? I know you feel it's important, but is it a significant part of the course? Are you doing something significant to help students make progress on it? Is it part of your... You're going to be the one asking those questions as they decide as a group which objectives to select. And then you'll help individual faculty when they get their reports back to understand what those adjusted scores are. Remember, we've got a 3-minute video on that. And converted averages. I don't have a video on that yet, but if you'd like one, I'll work on it. But the main thing is helping them understand what's behind it. What do these numbers mean? What do they mean to the individual faculty? So that's how you work with them and talk about their suggested actions. Here's what I mentioned earlier this morning, the teaching goals inventory. If your faculty are saying, I just don't know which objectives to select, take them out to the teaching goals inventory. Click on it. Go through it with him or her and see what pops up. You can do it for yourself first and get the experience and show them how you extrapolate from the results of that inventory to your faculty information form. It's a handy little tool, not created by IDEA. We just discovered that it's quite useful, so you might find that to be handy. A lot of faculty are keyed into Bloom's taxonomy. And you start talking about Bloom's taxonomy, they're like, oh yeah, Bloom's. And some of them think that the objectives are only Bloom's, but the objectives go beyond Bloom's. If you know Bloom's, you'll understand that team skills is not in there, lifelong learning is in there, information literacy is sort of in there. But so we've put this up on our blog. You can see a comparison to Bloom's taxonomy and the IDEA objectives. And you can snag that screen and show your faculty if they're really keyed into Bloom's, this might be something that will help them. You want to remind them that some objectives have higher average scores than others, and you can show them this actual average rating. So another thing you can do in terms of working with your individual faculty is when they're designing a course up front, remind them of this handout, that they can be thinking ahead. These are teaching methods that are associated with student progress in these learning objectives, so think ahead about that and plan to use some of them. Help them put their objectives in their syllabi. This is another way it might look to put their objectives in their syllabus. So it could be a table form, it could be just a list, however you want. I know that sometimes in schools of education, they state their NCATE standard, and then sometimes they state their IDEA objective and then course objective. So it gets a little cumbersome, but you want them to see the connection between the course objective and the IDEA. So your role to help them next is with the interpreting the reports. By now you know the 4 main questions, and so you can use these 4 questions with them. You can sit down with them and say, okay, how'd you do? And let them talk about it. All right, well, what's the context? What were your students like? What was their motivation like? What kind of class was it? How did your scores compare? And what might you do to improve student learning? So you just turn these questions around and use them as sort of consulting points with your faculty. Then you help them identify the suggested action steps. And they may need a little assistance with that. And so you identify which ones where it says consider increasing use. And then you want to connect them to the resources on the website. And there's where you can show them or send them the URL, show them how it's going to help them. Point out, I realize that one of your goals here at Jacksonville State is to increase your offerings for online programs. And so I think that application for online learning piece in the POD idea notes is going to be very useful for you, as well as idea paper 52, considerations of online course design. Then you may, in days gone by, what we've suggested is that faculty would bring their reports to you, and you could show them this spreadsheet, this worksheet, which you can get for free from our website on our homepage. Download it, it's Excel spreadsheet, and it's drop-down menus. You just click on it, and then you select which objectives you selected, and so forth. But with our digital reporting coming, hopefully this won't be necessary to do manually. It'll be automatic, and you'll be able to manage the data. Until then, you could do something like this, and then you would see graphs that would show you the trends. Here's how you're doing over time on your progress on relevant objectives. Here's how you're doing over time with your excellence of teacher score. So the next thing is the idea help community, and I wanted to show that to you. So when I get done with this, I'm going to pull that up and show it to you for you today. It's part of the homepage of the Idea Center, and you go to support. Click on support, and then you'll have to click on browse all topics. Go in there, and it takes you to actually a different site. It doesn't look like it, but that's what it is. It's a different search engine and so forth. And there's where the clients that use IDEA all over the country and some outside the country can communicate with one another. They post their questions, and either someone from the Idea Center will respond, or another client can respond. And this might be useful for your faculty. So they could go on to the help community. Now, we're not saying we don't want to talk to people. We're not like Verizon, you call up and you have to wait 30 minutes, and then wait another 30 minutes, and I don't want to pick on Verizon, but you know what I'm talking about. We didn't set this up because we don't want to talk to people. We set this up because we want clients to talk to clients and benefit from the synergy of learning from one another and having that network build over time and across space. So if you call the Idea Center, we will answer and we will talk to you. We also want all the clients to benefit from your question and to take advantage of that. So have your faculty search for information there. They've got a question, let's go to the help community and see what's being said there about it. What do they talk about? Ask specific questions, talk to other clients, and share their ideas. Now, the other day somebody went online and just shared a really cool idea. And it was just really nice. So feel free to do that. Classroom visitation. Let's talk about that. What's the value of peer learning? I think it's the gestalt, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That faculty learn from their colleagues as they form this community and practice among themselves. And this book came across my desk just a couple weeks ago, published in 2013. It was actually research done on K through 12. You're all shaking your head, you know about this book apparently. But I thought this quote was really important, and I think it's appropriate for us to extrapolate to higher ed. I really do. What they said is peer learning among small groups of teachers was the most powerful predictor of improved student achievement over time. So what's that saying? As teachers got together and talked about their student learning, who benefited? The students. So I'm suggesting to you that as we build communities of practice among your faculty here at Jacksonville State, who's going to benefit? Your students. You're going to see student learning improve. And that's based on research. I think that's a fair statement to say. So what is a community of practice again? It's a group of people who share a concern or passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. Here's the seminal work on the body of research on communities of practice, cultivating communities of practice, and I'll be giving these slides to someone before I leave, so if you're interested in go back and get the citation. I recommend this book. It's really good. If you want to build this sense of community, people who care about student learning among your faculty, and they're working together to improve that, you might want to get a hold of this book. So there are different kinds of communities of practice. Your big community of practice is everybody who's teaching here at Jacksonville State. Then there's like sub-communities. You're focusing on technologies. You're focusing on techniques. You're focusing on issues or challenges. Focusing on formats. Everybody teaching online. Everybody teaching hybrid. Those would be different like sub-communities. Type of faculty. Your brand new faculty. Full-time tenure-track faculty hired this August stepping in the door. They could certainly create their own sense of community and work together for a period of time. tenure track faculty, adjunct faculty, so each one could have its own subgroup of a community of practice. And then sometimes I'd like to suggest to you that some of these communities of practice could be determined by certain aspects of the idea system. And I'm going to give you some examples of that. Here's Amanda again. If she knew how often I talked about her, it probably wouldn't be good, but she's teaching a large biology class for non-majors. Her goal is to improve student understanding of biological concepts. Now she knows that idea method, teaching method 13 is going to be useful based on the correlation study, teaching methods to learning objectives, remember that? Teaching method 13 is introducing stimulating ideas about the subject. And so she would like to get some practice doing that. So she knows that Tom has done really well with item 13 in his large political science classes. And so she contacts Tom, and they've had this conversation, and he says, well, come on in and watch. I'll show you how I'm doing. Now we've got classroom visitation, and she goes into Tom's political science class. She's not going in to see how well Tom is teaching. That's not her goal. She's not going in to do evaluation. She's going in to learn from Tom. So we're building this community of learners among the faculty. And so she might ask some questions like this. How similar is Tom's class to mine? Because I think that would be relevant to know. What type of subject matter is Tom addressing? Now, number 3, how did Tom introduce stimulating ideas about the subject? Item 13. How did the students respond? How often did Tom seem to interject a stimulating idea? And what challenges did Tom experience with this approach? What can I learn from this class that I might adapt and use in my classes? So now you've got an example of using idea, system, and data to do a classroom visitation that hopefully will be very meaningful and relevant to faculty. I'll give you another example. Here's Alex. He's teaching a capstone in the business management major. And his goal is to help students apply principles to real-life situations, idea, objective, learning objective number 3. And we know from our research that teaching method 11 is associated with helping students make progress on that objective. He knows that Lynn does really well with teaching method 11, and so he goes to her and asks her if he can sit in her marketing class. And I have Susan there, it should be Lynn. How similar is Lynn's class to his? What type of learning does Lynn want her students to apply? And how did she relate the material to real life situations? So you're analyzing how is she actually doing it? And then what was the student's role in learning about real life situations? Did they do group work? Did they have projects? What is she actually doing to get at real life situations? And then what can I learn from this class that I might adopt in my class? So there's just 2 examples of how you can use idea, items, and data for classroom visitation to build a community of practice that values student learning. Now we'll talk about strategic planning for faculty development, workshops. These are just some list of courses that are or workshop topics that you could use. I have mixed feelings about workshops. I think sometimes they're useful and a lot of times they're not. I used to say, when I was at Hopkins, I used to say workshops don't work. Because what happened there? The same old people came all the time. The people who really needed it didn't come. And a lot of times it was, I don't want to disparage it completely. I think there was a lot of value that comes out of it. But it can become sort of routine, and it doesn't really impact the culture in the way that you want it to. So, nonetheless, these are topics that you might want to have workshops on, or you might want to interject into your department meeting, or when you're having meetings with your new faculty for the first time this August, or what have you. Incorporating idea into your syllabus, how to do that, how to select your objectives, encouraging high response rates, interpreting your reports, how to get better ratings, focus on learning, and how to use the So those would be some quick suggestions for that. Some ways to do it, to encourage conversations would be have something called coffee and conversation, where you match up faculty and tell them to meet for coffee whenever they want. But you can start that and stop that and have them debrief and tell about it. Same thing with paired discussions, only it doesn't have to be in person, it can be online. We did just about all of these types of things at Johns Hopkins. We have 5 campus universities spread out from Baltimore down to Washington and Rockville, Maryland. So you can imagine that Hopkins is the largest employer in the state of Maryland. So we were constantly trying to find ways to connect faculty with faculty, whether it was with brown bag lunches or suppers, because we had a lot of faculty teaching at night, or paired discussions, classroom visitations and observations we already talked about. The end of year faculty meeting is something that we held very dear to our hearts. I don't know if you do anything like this, but we often incorporated some of the learning that they had from IDEA. What we would do is we would invite certain faculty to do a poster session, do a poster for a poster session. And the event was called the Symposium on Learning in Higher Education. We would invite a big name speaker to come, and then faculty would do posters not on their discipline. This was key. But on something that had to do with the pedagogy or the curriculum development, or how they used IDEA to improve their teaching and learning. And I can tell you one of the happiest moments of my professional life has been standing at this, and we did it in the glass pavilion at Homewood campus. If any of you are familiar with the Johns Hopkins campus, it's beautiful. And in May, the azaleas were in full bloom. We had wine and cheese down the middle of the room. Posters were around the perimeter. We had live music from the Peabody, which is one of the schools at Hopkins. It was very nice. The dean came. Usually I didn't see the dean, but once or twice a year he came, and he would give out awards and so on and so forth. And we would have a guest speaker speak, and it was a big, big deal. And for me, it was exciting to see people who were well known in their field, who were doing posters on teaching and learning, and who were talking about their IDEA results and what they're doing with IDEA. So I just want to describe that event for you, because you figure out what's going to be valued here at Jacksonville State. What would work here? And what would faculty want to participate in, and try to create value for that kind of faculty development. So you also want to work on the number of objectives that are being selected, and ask them what they're emphasizing. We talked about that. I think I'm going to go fast through these. So here's where you're going to make a decision about where you're going to put your money. You've got X amount of dollars to plan some faculty development sessions. And you know that with 42 classes, only about 30% are using this teaching method, inspire students to set and achieve goals, which really challenge them, when it could have been, or at least it was associated with student progress on the objectives that were selected. So it would be useful for you then to do a workshop on that item. Also, what I would suggest is find people who are doing it well and let them be the ones to do it. Or maybe have a forum, let 2 or 3 people sit up here and just talk, here's my story, here's what I'm doing with this particular teaching method and how it's working. And just keep it low key and have conversations about it. Now, another thing that we haven't talked a lot about is these overall objectives, overall ratings for excellence of course and excellence of teacher. And here in this example, you'll see excellence of course goes down a little bit. It's still hitting that 60 point, but I was at one large community college where they got a personal report for all their adjuncts every semester. And every semester, their excellence of course dropped dramatically for adjuncts. They did great in progress on relevant objectives, great on excellence of teacher, and excellence of course. And the theory behind that was, these are passionate teachers. They're doing a great job. Students love them. Students are learning, but they didn't develop a course. And they don't have a sense of ownership over that course. And so that was one of the theories behind it. The question was, what do we do about that? Well, in the same way that we looked at the relationship between the 20 teaching methods and the 12 learning objectives, we also looked at the 20 teaching methods and the global items, excellence of course, excellence of teaching. which of those teaching methods are associated with excellence of teaching, and which of those teaching methods are associated with excellence of course. And here's the four main ones that rise to the top, that will give you the biggest bang for your buck, are these four. Teaching method 6, 10, 13, and 14. So I can just tell you right now, if you have X amount of dollars to spend, if you spend it on these four, they have high correlation to both excellence of teacher and excellence of course. If you have a lot of adjuncts, I'd start with these four. And maybe you take all four for the whole year next year. Maybe you do 6 and 10 in the fall and 13 and 4 in the spring. I don't know. It's up to you what your resources are. Maybe you just pick 2 for next year and then another 2 for another year. But we know, based on our correlation study, which of these methods are correlated with excellence of teacher and excellence of course. And so these four would be a good decision for you to. And the other thing I was going to say, if you've got an adjunct, let's say, or a colleague or someone in your department, and on page 3 of his or her individual report, there's like 10 suggested action steps. Well, you don't want that person to try to do 10 things next. That's too much. You've got to pick and choose. So my suggestion to you is start here. Filter through this. So are 6, 10, 13, and 14 among those 10? They likely are. So then just pick 6 and 10 or something like that. And use these to be sort of your first line filtering of which ones would influence. Okay? Okay, so here's Jan. She's a new faculty member, and Juan has been consistently earning excellence of teacher and excellence of course scores. So she's going to go to Juan's class and ask similar questions, and then ask, based on these teaching methods, 6 and 10, how does Juan demonstrate that he makes it clear how each topic fits into the course, and how does Juan demonstrate that he explains course material clearly and concisely? And so you can design faculty visitation around these items to help faculty get the kind of support and mentoring that they need, especially if they're new faculty or adjuncts. You can help them with curriculum mapping, show them how to map out their objectives to the idea. We've talked about that before. And then classroom assessment techniques, you can help them understand how they might use some of the idea objectives for classroom assessment techniques, and also use it to see whether they are getting a feel for students making progress on types of objectives that they say are relevant. They can do that for creating their own digital feedback. Okay, I'm going to tell you my story now, and then we'll be able to break up into groups. This is a short story. Point Loma Nazarene University has given me permission to share this story, and Jo Clemens is the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning there. She gave a presentation on this actually at our user group meeting. So they had the wonderful fortune of somebody giving their Center for Teaching and Learning some money to develop a faculty development summer institute program. And so they decided it needed to be with technology. They wanted their faculty to use probably iPads is what most of them selected to use. And so they called it Technology Infused Learning Environments, TILE. And it was about a 6-week program. They met 4 days a week from 9 to 12. But here's what she did that was brilliant. The first thing she did is she sat down with her faculty developers, her staff, and they decided on what their learning objectives were for this summer institute. And they mapped it out to the idea objectives. And they came up with idea objectives for the faculty development summer institute. The next thing they did is they went to the relationship to teaching objectives, to teaching methods to learning objectives, and decided which of those teaching methods they wanted to employ to help their faculty now, who are acting as students, to make progress on their learning objectives. The next thing they did is they modeled idea in every aspect of it. So they got a syllabus, they had their idea objectives in it, they talked about idea as they started the Summer Institute, they talked about idea halfway through, they talked about, when they got to the section where they talked about Bloom's taxonomy, they showed how idea fit Bloom's, so on and so forth. They actually piped me in as a guest speaker one day to talk about idea. So they had all these wonderful things going on, and in the end, they actually used the idea form to evaluate it because the donor wanted to have data on the successfulness. So they modeled it, they used the correlation studies to figure out what they were going to do. They taught them how to use the teaching goals inventory. They taught them how to put it in their syllabus. They also talked about response rates with their faculty, and then they administered it. And guess what they found? They found something very interesting. One of their objectives was number 3, which is application planning, and it did not get rated high. And what they learned is their faculty were learning a lot about how to use technology, but they didn't have enough hands-on. And so when they redesigned the next title, Summer Institute, they added in some optional afternoon hands-on practice to give those faculty opportunity. So they closed the loop. They used that data to inform and their practice and improve their program. So, any questions about how to use idea data for faculty development before I send you into your groups again? We have plenty of time, so. It's called wait time. Okay. So now, I don't have a separate paper for you. I want you to think through the things I just shared with you. Oh, let me take that back. I do have some things that will be useful. You have in your folder, you've got something we call Handout 7, which is facilitating response rates. You have Handout 22, which is the correlation of teaching methods to excellence of course, excellence of teacher, which I talked about earlier. Handout 23 really is good for faculty evaluation, so we're not going to use that now. That's what that's for. You have idea item number 10, explain course material clearly and concisely. This is a pod idea note. This is an example of a pod idea note written by Mary Dean Corsinelli at University of Massachusetts Amherst. If you don't know Mary Dean, she's an expert in the field. So I would say hold those, keep those in your hands. Also, in your on the right-hand side, behind tab 1, you have handouts for extra questions, sample extra questions. We didn't talk a lot about this, but one is for online courses. And since I know a lot of you are teaching online courses, you might find that to be useful. So when you're working with faculty, you can help them identify what kind of data they want to capture. Okay, so you have these resources in front of you. You know that page 7 is critically important for faculty development planning. Page 7 in your summary report. Page 7 is the one that, if you have a long black bar, it's indicating that there's a teaching method that was used infrequently when it probably should have been used frequently. So you got page 7, and you've got these handouts. And I'd like you to spend time looking at your group summary report and deciding, okay, you have to create a faculty development plan for fall for your department. Based on the data you have in front of you and the resources you have with you, what does that, sketch out that plan. What might it look like? And then we're going to have a debriefing that you call out, and then some of your ideas might really be helpful for others in the room. Okay? But let it be data-driven. Any questions?
Our courses overall, and also our program. To start with our data, the first thing that we're going to do, our faculty are choosing 2 mini objectives. The average chosen is 7. So we'll start off in August and September with kind of the basic thing that she did this morning, kind of explaining what this is and how to choose the objectives and the difference between the essential and the important. So we'll work on that and try to help faculty sift out, get the 3 to 5 really strong objectives that reflect what our 2 new programs and all of our new courses are going to be trying to accomplish. In October and November, we will work on adding questions, personalizing the surveys, figuring out what kind of questions to add and how that would again reflect the focus and the vision for our programs and courses. And we're also going to discuss strategies to increase our response rate. Our response rate is very low, only 50%. So we want to get everybody involved in some strategies for the pricing strategies for that. In January and February, we'll return and start looking at our first semester data. So we're going to analyze our data and start to develop a plan of action based on how our courses and our new programs are performing. And we're going to do that with our actual real data. In April and May, we will analyze data again from the spring semester, start to look for some trends if we can find them, and start developing a plan of action, adjustments, what successful we want to keep and what challenging us we want to tweak, and we'll carry that into fall of 2014.
Great experience. Before you go, or are you the one that's going to get the, share that?
Rosie and I think that some of our problems may get lied with the adjunct because they're just not really up to speed on
Especially
online courses. And so we're thinking about a retreat or a seminar in the summer for our adjuncts to come in and get them doing some of the same thing that Dan was talking about, teaching them how to, funnel down to a question or an objective. And that's where we're going to start looking at that.
And I think we talked about going back and getting some data on just your adjuncts, which you can do. If you've got your course ID number, which is a little number on the back page, on the bottom, page 4 of your individual report, you'll see a little number there. You've got that number, a collection of numbers, with the faculty name, your institution's name, the course number, course name, and submit that to us. We can give you a group summary report, and then you can see just how your adjuncts are doing and compare it to them.
That's where we're going to start. We're going to start with that.
Get your data first, and then make your decisions about what to do to help them. That's brilliant. Another group back here, I think they're gone now, but they are going to start collecting data on adjuncts. They're going to use local code to do that. Somebody else want to share? Okay, I think we're all burned out. Any concluding comments or questions? Thank you. All the best. Contact me if you have any questions. Thank you.
How will we get the slides to you?
I will email them to Tian and then they can go out from there.
She'll email them.